Hi, back with another tutorial. This one has actually been requested more than all the other tutorials that I've done, so I'm sorry that it's taken me this long to get around to doing it. The purpose of this tutorial is to give a basic understanding of how the node graph works and to help you know how to really experiment with it and grow your knowledge on your own through the foundation that hopefully I'm going to lay in this video. In the future, hopefully I'll release a more comprehensive guide of all the specific different nodes and components they can add to it, but this is just meant to give you a base understanding. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to start just by creating an empty object. I'm going to call it example, but this is really what's going to house my node graph. So I'm going to add component. I'm going to put in a node graph. And after I've put that in, I can click show graph here, and it'll bring up this window where all the magic happens, basically. This is where all the nodes go. This is where all the programming happens. Right now it's empty because I don't have anything else in it. And I don't really like working with it in this free floating window. So I like to grab this tab and put it in the bottom here so it frees up some visual space for me. And really, you're going to have to familiarize yourself with three different kinds of components or nodes in the node graph. The first one the first type are signal producers. Now these are just my names for them. It's not official ones, but there you go. These are nodes that create a signal for you to work with. The next type are signal modifiers / combiners. So these are components which combine signals or somehow modify the signal. And the last type that we're going to go over are signal receivers. These are the ones that I basically have categorized as signal receivers because they're the ones that take the signal and have an effect on your level or in the game. Okay, so we're going to just start with signal producers and we'll work our way through them. The first signal producer, I'm just going to create another empty object to house it in, is going to be what I call a player sensor. This is going to be a signal producer which produces a signal when the player is in a specific area. And to mark the area real quick, I'm just going to make a basic cube and I'm going to put it pretty far in the ground, and I'm just going to call this floor panel. And it's just going to basically show me where my player sensor is. The actual player sensor is going to be an empty object with a box collider and a trigger volume component. Okay, I'm going to name this object player sensor so it makes more sense. Now it's important when you're doing a sensor because we don't want the player to physically interact with this box collider. We need to mark it is trigger. And so now this green area, this box collider that I'm playing with here, is going to be the area that's my player sensor. So whenever the player is inside this area, it'll create a signal. Trigger volume, I'm not going to mess with. So when I click back to my node graph, I'm going to click live update, so it'll keep updating and add the components I add. I'm going to have this player sensor trigger, and that's going to be a component which, if I press play, you can see, creates a signal out of this little dot every time a player is within this area that I designated. So you can see right here, you can see it turned to 1 right here when the player's inside. It's a 0 when there's no player. So that's your first simple signal producer. The second signal producer I'm going to show you is going to be another easy one. It's going to be a grab sensor. Okay. So for this one, I need something to grab, so I'm going to make another cube. I'm going to put it, right there. And then on this cube, I want the player to physically be able to grab it, so I'm going to leave the box collider not checked here where it says is trigger. I'm going to add a grab sensor. Then I'm going to rename this cube grab sensor. So when I click back to my node graph, boom, got a grab sensor. And this one, pretty simple, but I'm going to show the example anyway. When the player walks up to it, they can jump on it, nothing will happen. But when they grab it, boom, you get a signal. And so you can see I can stand on the thing, trigger the player sensor, and then grab it, trigger the grab sensor. Two different signals going there inside the node graph. Okay. The last signal producer that I'm going to show for the purposes of this video is a object sensor. So this one's going to work similar to the player sensor, except it's going to sense an object instead of a player. So first thing I'm going to need, it's not an empty object, I'm going to need another floor panel just to show where the object sensor is going to be active. I'm going to need an object for the sensor to sense, so I'm going to just make another cube. I'm going to come over to transform it and just make it smaller. And then in order for the player to interact with this and pick it up and carry it around, it's going to need a rigid body component, which I'm going to set the mass to, I don't know, 25. Good enough. And that means I can carry this cube around instead of it being stationary. And now I need here, I should name this actually. Sorry, I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so I'm going to be making a few mistakes like this along the way. That one's the floor, and then this one is the small cube, just to keep myself organized. And then this one is the object collider. I'm changing the names in the top right hand corner if you can't see. Okay, object collider. Again, just like the player collider, the player sensor, I'm going to need a box collider marked is trigger. I'm going to move this over the area where I want the sensor to be. And then I'm going to add a trigger volume. But this time, instead of leaving it blank, I'm going to click the small cube here. Well, I need to be in here, but I need to click and drag the small cube into this area where it says collider to check for. And that way it's not going to activate when the player's on it, but when the small cube I put in there. I'll show you the example. Oh, I should move that too. One moment. I'm going to go back actually. I'm going to take this object collider and make it a little more easier to see. Okay, so we're going to see all three of these signal producers at work during this example. Okay, first one, player sensor, activates when I'm standing on it. Second one, object grab sensor, activates when I grab it. Third one, got my cube. You can see down here, object sensor, it lights up green, meaning it's activated when the little cube I'm carrying goes into the space it designated with the box collider. So there you go. There are your three signal producers. There are a lot more, but for this introductory tutorial, those are the three that I'm going to start with. I'm actually going to skip over signal modifiers and combiners first and go straight to signal receivers. And when it comes to signal receivers, almost always I'm working with signal unity events. I'll show you what I mean. The first thing I want, the first receiver I want, is going to be a light. And so I want, when I grab something or when I stand somewhere, I want a light to turn on. So I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to do a light source and do a spotlight. So it gives me this handy dandy little light. I'm going to angle it straight down and center it on my grab sensor. I think I'm going to make it a little bit bigger like that. Probably increase the intensity to like 5. and let's make it green. Okay, fancy green spotlight. Now I want that to turn on, let's say for now, when I grab this cube, when the grab sensor is activated. So what I need to do is up here, right here on the receiver, I'm going to add component, and I'm going to put signal unity event. I'm just going to go through this. It'll make sense as I go along. The triggers are what's activated when the signal unity event is activated. So I'm going to add a trigger. I'm going to drag the spotlight into that object, and I'm going to say light bool enabled. Took a little bit of trial and error to find this, but I'll give you the hint right now. Bool enabled is the one you want for lights. And I'm going to click that box saying yes enabled when you get the signal. And then I'm going to come to this light, and I'm going to put its default state to disabled. So the light's not right there right now. When I come to my node graph, you can see I have a signal unity event receiver light. I'm going to put that in my receivers right here. And let's say grab sensor, I want the light to turn on just by connecting that little white dot to that white dot of the receiver. Really simple connection there, like drawing a wire. So now you can see when I activate the grab sensor by grabbing it, turns on the light because I connected the signal producer to the signal receiver with the event of turning on the light. So there you have it, your first node graph completion right here. Turn on the light by grabbing something. Kind of want to make that more exciting though. So I'm going to create another empty here. For receiver 2, I'm going to have a bell sound because I want a sound to happen when I grab that. So the first thing I need is a audio source. So inside of this bell sound, I'm going to put bell sound. And then over here in the audio source inside of this object, I can click this little circle and I can search through all of the audio that Human Fall Flat has. Or I can even put in my own audio that I've downloaded from the internet or something. So I'm going to type in search for bell. Sure, that bell sound is probably great. If you want to sample it, you can double click right here. There it is. There's the bell sound we got. Perfect. Back at the receiver, I'm going to add another signal unity event, add a trigger, click and drag the bell sound into the object space there, go to audio source, and then play. And so this event is going to play the audio source found inside of the bell sound object, which is right here. For the audio source, you don't have to mess with much of this. I would recommend unclicking play on awake and then turning the spatial blend to 3D. And besides that, you can mess with all the other options on your own, but it'll work just in its default state like this. If I click back to my node graph, you can see I now have my signal unity event for the bell sound. It can be another receiver. I'm going to say when I grab, I want the bell sound to happen right here. So I just connected those two components inside my node graph. And so we can see how that works when I press the play button. Excuse my character skin, by the way, it's a little lewd. Okay, grab, get the bell, got the light. Perfect. Bell would even play every time that I grab the cube. Gets a little annoying there. Okay, the last receiver that I want to make for the purposes of this video is a flying cube. This one's actually a good time. So the first thing I want for this one is I'm going to want my cube. That's going to be my flying cube. I'm actually going to place it right on top of my grab sensor. And if it's going to move, it's going to need the rigid body component. Nothing can move without it. I'm going to set its mass to 100, sure. And I want this cube to fly straight up and down. I don't want it to tilt at all. I don't want it to move anywhere else. So I'm going to freeze its rotation on every axis, and I'm going to freeze its position for X and Z, meaning it only can move on the Y, which is the green arrow, up and down. And it's just restricting its movement in that way. In order to make it fly, I'm going to give it what's called constant force. And this is going to push the cube in any of these directions that I can set the force. You can come through and you can experiment with these on your own. But to fly up, I'm going to put 1,000 force on the Y positive. So it's going to get a positive force on the Y, making it fly upwards. However, I don't want it to fly up initially, so I'm going to set its default state to off. And then I'm going to come to flying cube, another signal unity event, add a trigger, click and drag my flying cube into that space, constant force, bool enabled, and I'm going to click yes. Come to my node graph, I have my receiver here. That's going to turn on the constant force. I'm going to use my grab sensor 2 because why not? And so now when I grab, it's going to activate this unity event, which is on the cube going to turn on the constant force, which default state is turned off. Okay, let's see how that works. Okay, so you see, even though I landed on that cube, because I froze its position, I'm not able to move it around at all. Just what I want. But when I grab the sensor, it's constant force, as you can see here, turned on because of the unity event, and there goes my cube. No way to get it back currently, but glad that that worked out. Okay. The last receiver that I want is going to be, I'm not going to copy and paste that actually, I'm going to make a new one. Create empty. Receiver 4, I'm going to have a kill switch. And the kill switch is going to turn everything off. So I want a signal unity event here again, but instead of just one trigger, I'm going to put 3 triggers in. The first one, I'm going to click and drag the light into. And this one, I'm going to have the light turn off. I'm going to have the bell sound. I'm going to say audio source stop. So if it is ringing, it'll stop. And I'm going to take the flying cube. I'm going to say cube, constant force, not enabled. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. And so this will essentially turn off all the 3 other effects that the grab sensor has right now. I'm going to take this kill switch and put it in the signal receivers. Now I want another grab sensor to be my kill switch. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy and paste it, put it right there. And this is going to be signal producer 4. I'm going to call this grab sensor 2. Okay, so that's my grab sensor 2. I now have right here my grab sensor 2, and I'm going to connect that to my kill switch, which again is a signal unity event which turns off everything that right now the grab sensor is turning on. Okay. Let's see how that works. Okay. So right now, I'm gonna grab it, get all my effects, light turns on, cube starts flying. I'm gonna grab my kill switch, all turns off. Perfect. So now I can control whether I want that cube to be flying or not. Lots of fun puzzles you can make with this. Lots of good times could be had once you figure out the node graph. And if you watch on the bottom of the screen, you can see grab sensor 1 activating the 3 signals on the right, kill switch activating the one on the right. Perfect. Now let's look at some signal modifiers and combiners. These can be really useful as well. So I'm going to click on my example up here. I'm going to just collapse everything. And I'm going to add, actually it's easier to, if you work here. Quick add node, signal combine. That's what I use most of the time. And so I'm going to get this fancy combine node that comes into my node graph. Clicking on it, I get the chance to edit it right here in the left window, or I could edit it here, same thing. So for now, let's say I want it to be an and I want it to have 3 inputs. I'm going to put in a 3, hit enter, and I'm going to have to refresh the node graph using this button. So now I have an AND combiner with 3 inputs. I'm going to put the player sensor, I'm going to put the grab sensor, I'm going to put the object collider, object sensor, and I'm going to put this connecting to all 3. So now what I'm saying is I need every one of these 3 signals to signal everything instead of just the grab sensor. I'll give you a little visual of how that works. Okay. First off, I'm going to grab the cube, put on the object sensor, and boom, you can see object sensor activated. One of the nodes of the AND combiner is activated. Not enough though. I'm going to stand on the player sensor, activating another, and grab it. Boom, with all 3 signals, it activates the 3 receivers. Kill switch still works as normal. So there, another fancy puzzles. Lots of possibilities here with different sensors you can use to create puzzles that you have to work out like this. We're going to bring that down. The next combiner that I'm going to look at is signal time. I use this one all the time. Okay, apologize for the technical difficulty. I clicked the wrong one. Sometimes this screws stuff up. Don't do the toggle for now. Quick add note, signal time, not signal toggle is what you want. Refreshing it, got my timer. There we go. So what my objective here is I want you to have to trigger all 3 of them for 3 seconds before anything activates. So I'm going to connect this AND switch to the signal time, and then I'm going to have the max value reached node connect to the receivers, to the events. Then clicking on the timer, I'm going to set the max value to, I don't know, 2.5 seconds. I'm going to click these 2 boxes. Signal timer, start timer on signal, reset timer on signal. You can play around with these options on your own time. It's actually a very versatile node, this signal time. And so now what I'm saying is all 3 of those have to be activated for 2.5 seconds before it signals the rest. Let's try it out and watch the node graph as it's happening. Okay. Grab the cube, put it on, so I have my object sensor satisfied, player sensor satisfied, and watch when I grab, the timer starts counting up until it reaches 2.5 seconds, and boom, flying up, grab it, goes back down, and then grab it for another 2.5 seconds. As soon as the max value gets reached, it signals out of that node, and it signals to those signal receivers. There we go. Last one that I want to show you is called signal math invert. This is an extremely useful node because it just inverts a signal from a 0 to a 1 or from a 1 to a 0. So I'm going to take this max value reached, I'm going to put it in there, and I'm going to put the inverted signal into the kill switch. Basically saying if the timer is not activated, then to kill it. and we'll see how this signal math invert affects a little scenario that we have going on right here. Okay. First off, gotta satisfy the object sensor. It works. Nope, doesn't work. Okay. Object sensor satisfied. Player sensor, grab sensor. 2.5 seconds. Now watch, when I let go of this, watch the signal math invert at the bottom, and how as soon as it's not receiving a signal, it inverts it, activates the kill switch. So now I have to be grabbing this in order for everything to work. As soon as I step off, let's say, kills it. So there's the good use of the signal math invert node. So there are, like, if you look in here, so many different options for components. It's a ridiculous amount of component options that you can put into here. My recommendation, start with a few basic ones. Start with these basic ones. Make some puzzles, make some levels, including them, and just start branching out and experimenting with what you know, and the possibilities are limitless for the stuff you can end up doing. A great place to start is actually this node graph reference guide by Mildred Bumble. You can find it on Human Fall Flat Guides, and it just has, like you can see, a bunch of different nodes that you can use in your node graphs. And I recommend clicking on Mildred Bumble and clicking on his guides, and he has a bunch of different guides when it comes to rigging level logics and node graphs and everything like that. Great place to go to if you need any advice. The other place I'd recommend is joining the Human Fall Flat Discord and asking questions in the workshop support. Sometimes it takes a day to get an answer, but there's always going to be someone who's going to help you fix your problem. I do it all the time for new creators. So I hope this video has been helpful figuring out the node graph, and happy creating.